So guys, I'm playing Dawn Trail, the new expansion for Final Fantasy XIV. And you know what? I felt like doing something I wanted to do. I got kind of tired of work and all this schedule that I make for myself, so I decided to just stay home. And I quickly got inspired and antsy. And I finally made something about the same quality as this mask I made years ago. I recently got a whole bunch of copper. And I thought, well, what if I made a copper scoop? And this is roofing copper on some wood that at first I thought I was doing the wrong thing. I grabbed some wood that was too thin and I made this piece. And then I realized none of my other wood had this texture. We cut this out. All this is 5 inches across, 5 inches down, and then I used my compass to draw a half circle. And then I took a piece of pipe, put it into my vise, and by hand I just kind of like pressed it and formed it into a mostly straight half tube. Then I cut the piece of wood. It was just a scrap of, I don't know what kind of wood this is. It was just a scrap of wood that we found in a dumpster in Conshohocken, actually. It was just a long plank. And while I was working on the next bit, I am so glad. I lucked out getting the verdigris to have that gradient. I didn't even think of which direction it was going. I also lucked out on the orientation of the book matching because I had to double that up. This is a one-day build though. It was a one-day build because I didn't have to film it. That's one of the reasons. I had Thais sit there with a file and she cut in all of these notches so it looked almost like gear teeth. And then I was able to fold that down. I was going to have her notch this other piece and fold those in too, but I ended up not, and I think it kind of works out. Then for this half moon piece, I was a bit reluctant to cut it down to the height of the copper. So I didn't do that at first. And I took my Japanese saw, I put this in the vise, held it with a glove. I used the glove as a piece of cloth. And I just, by hand, I sawed so these pieces that I bent in can bite into there. Now that has resulted in a somewhat loose, like I can kind of feel it move just a teeny tiny bit. But boy, do I love this. I then had to figure out the handle. And the handle, that's where you could really mess up. Because it was at that point, I was like, do I really know what I'm doing? I don't know the design that I wanted. So I realized that this wood wouldn't really work with any of the other wood that I have in my workshop. So I cut out a section of that wood and I cut it down the middle and I glued it together. And I let it sit for like 45 minutes. It was a total happenstance that it happened to be book matched. Like I lucked out on how I put it together. And then I drew out the profile of what I wanted. I cut down, and then so you have like all these slots that I cut down, and I use a chisel to break those little tombstones off. Makes it way easier. And then I have some cheap Harbor Freight woodworkers chisels, and with this still gripped in the vise, I was able to carve it away. And now the copper is a completely, like, it is all curves, not compound curves, but you have round curves and you have half circle curve there. So to go to bevels, I didn't know if that would really work out that much, but as for this, I tried really hard to have it to where it tapers in. I really wanted this to look like something from Final Fantasy or from a couple hundred years ago or whatever. I really wanted this to look kind of magical. And so what I ended up doing was by hand, I just kind of tried to get it to where it goes from being square down to being 45-degree angle. And I think I matched that up pretty well. I've never done this kind of angle before, but I'm really happy with how that looks. So then we have like this, it goes from being square down to being kind of chiseled. Well, that's exactly what it is. Now I decided to leave some of this base because I thought, well, wouldn't that kind of look nice to have that leading into the half moon piece? Now I did cut down too far and there is a bit of a gap there, but I can undo that later on. And the sides I was a little bit too conservative with, and when I cut it down I had to keep kind of chiseling away to make this fit because I didn't want to break this. This is actually pretty weak. I mean, it's not weak for this, but it's weak when facing power tools or saws or anything like that. Not power tools. I actually didn't use any. No, I did use power tools. I used my drill press and my belt sander. That's what it was. But yeah, this is kind of weak in the face of working on it in the workshop. But having a scoop to scoop things, well, it's strong enough for that, especially once it's all glued together. I wouldn't want to wedge this in there and then it cracks it along the bottom. So then this all fit together really well. I glued this onto here. There's no steel used in this. It's only copper and only wood. And I needed nails. Now I've never made nails. Oh, by the way, I've also tapered this in too. I took a pair of pliers and bent it in. That way you won't catch yourself on that metal. It kind of goes in a bit, and so it kind of hugs along that. I've never made nails, and I never made copper nails. And honestly, I feel like maybe starting with copper nails was actually a little bit more difficult, because for me, heating metal is easy. But copper nails, you don't have to heat. You have to have a special nail header. And I spent like an entire hour drilling holes through bits of metal that I had, trying to make a nail header. And I ended up making 4 nails. Only one of them had the head centered. Well, one of them does have the head centered, but it is now stuck in the nail header because the drill bit that I had cut off and I was using to poke the nails back out, well, that drill bit has bent. So I have one nail stuck in the metal casting that I used, and then I had one nail that was perfect and one nail that wasn't so perfect. But I only needed 2 nails, so I went with those. They're only about that long or so, but still it's pretty good. So this is copper that was on the Lansdowne Borough Hall, and the roofing guys were going to scrap it. This is actually cut from one of the pieces that they actually crumpled up, and I couldn't use the metal part. I have a toe cutter or something, like this tool from the 1930s that I got at the Rough and Tumble Steam Festival. It works really well. It's like one of those electric ones where it makes those curly cues, but it's by hand and much more difficult and makes you curse your hands. But it did work for the most part. And I was able to cut it down the creases, because those creases are now compromised. They've been smashed at well, I guess 360 degrees or 180 degrees. And I'm able to make several from each little square, because this doesn't take all that much copper. Gosh, the gradient though, is just beautiful. Like, look at that. I at first thought I would round over the edges of this, making it stiffer, but it is actually pretty stiff. So that's pretty cool. I'm waiting for the linseed oil to dry. I used a 400 grit belt sanding belt, and that has brought out this absolutely beautiful grain. I'm gonna have to use my book, Identifying Wood, in order to identify what kind of wood is that, because that's nice. Well, that's pretty much it. Just a quick little look at something I made off camera, and I feel like that is very fancy. I really love how this looks. I feel like I've for the first time this year, I made something that I actually feel good about. And I didn't just kind of walk away from it being like, well, it works. But I made this and I feel like it has a really beautiful style. And if anybody's interested in one of these, maybe I should start selling them on Etsy. Well, that's pretty much it. Maybe I'll make a video in the future about making these. And hope you guys enjoyed this video. Thank you very much for watching. See ya.